In the days following the solar funeral, the silence surrounding Max began to lift. Slowly, piece by piece, he began to emerge from the hollow shell he had become. Conversations that had once been curt gestures or single words turned into short, quiet exchanges. He still carried his grief, but the crushing weight had lessened, and with it, his determination to connect returned. Malinar noticed it first during one of their walks through the Arboretuma lush artificial garden, designed to replicate various ecosystems. Despite the quiet murmurs of his armed escorts trailing at a cautious distance, Max spoke more freely, describing the plants he'd studied on Earth and comparing them to what grew here. "There's a surprising similarity," he mused, crouching to examine a flowering vine. "My mother would have loved this. She used to say that nature connects us all, no matter how far apart we are." Malinar tilted her head. "Your mother's beliefs, were they spiritual in nature?" Max nodded. "She followed something called animism. It's the belief that every living thing, even things like rivers or stones, has a soul or spirit. She used to tell me that the stars themselves had souls, which is why we should treat them with respect." Malinar's eyes widened. "That's remarkably similar to the faith of my people. We also believe in the spirit of all things, though we call it the veil." A faint smile tugged at Max's lips, the first she'd seen in days. Maybe we're not so different after all. As Max began to re-engage, so too did the crew's perception of him shift. While some still regarded him with caution, others were drawn to his quiet intellect and sharp problem-solving skills. Requests for his assistance became more frequent, and Max obliged without hesitation. Whether it was helping Ava optimize ship systems or lending his expertise to repair delicate equipment, Max worked with the same quiet competence that had once made him stand out on Earth. Even Captain Cabo, though still guarded, began to engage with Max in short, professional conversations. Their interactions were tense, but there was a mutual respect growing beneath the surface, though neither would admit it outright. The shift wasn't without its struggles. One evening in the common lounge, Cabo vented his frustrations to a group of officers. "How are we supposed to trust him when we don't even know where Earth is?" he grumbled, his deep voice echoing through the room. "He's been on this ship for weeks, and still he refuses to tell us." Malinar, seated nearby, exchanged a glance with Ava's holographic form. She sighed and stood, stepping into the circle of officers. "Captain," she began, her voice steady, "I think it's time you understood why Max holds to his first contact protocol so firmly." The room fell silent, all eyes on her. Ava projected herself beside Malinar, her tone calm yet firm. "Humanity is not like other Deathworlders," Ava began. "Their first contact protocol isn't a declaration of superiority or arrogance. It's a safeguard, a means of ensuring peace and preventing catastrophic misunderstandings." Cabo folded his arms, his expression skeptical. "And yet he keeps Earth's location secret. What does that say about his trust in us?" "It says more about us than it does about him," Malinar interjected. "We've judged him by his origin, not by his actions. Even I've done it, despite everything he's shown us." Ava nodded. "Consider this. Max could have armed himself since the second day he woke aboard this ship. The cryopod we recovered him from contained a kinetic firearm and a survival knife. He's been aware of these weapons the entire time, yet he's never once reached for them, not even when he couldn't understand us." The revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Malinar's ears twitched, her own shock evident. "He had access to weapons during the funeral?" "Yes," Ava confirmed. "He chose to let them be consumed by the star, knowing that if he kept them, it might be misinterpreted as a threat. That speaks volumes about his understanding of the crew's fears and his commitment to cooperation." Cabo's brows furrowed, the weight of Ava's words sinking in. "Max has also given me unfettered access to his tablet's data stores," Ava continued. "He's never once attempted to manipulate me or leverage his intelligence against us. And let me remind you, his intellect exceeds that of many council species renowned for their brilliance. Despite that, he's been nothing but respectful and cooperative." Malinar stepped forward, her gaze steady on Cabo. "You say you want trust from him, Captain, but have you truly shown him the same? He hasn't asked about our homeworlds or our vulnerabilities. He's been guarded, yes, but not hostile. And he's gone out of his way to help us, even when he didn't have to." Cabo was silent, his Ursine features a mix of contemplation and discomfort. Later that night, Cabo sat alone in his cabin, the weight of the day's revelations pressing heavily on him. His thoughts drifted to his late son, Coda. The boy's bright spirit and unshakable belief in the goodness of others had always been a source of pride and pain. Coda had died defending an Uthyadan colony from Deathworlder slavers, sacrificing himself to protect innocent lives. Despite being a civilian, He had fought with a courage born of love, not hate. Cabo's gaze fell to a holographic image of Coda on his desk, his son's youthful face beaming with joy. "What would you have done, Coda?" he murmured. The answer came easily, as if Coda himself were whispering in his ear. Coda would have embraced Max, literally and figuratively. A hug, the ultimate gesture of trust among their kind, for no other reason than the beauty Coda saw in all living things. Cabo closed his eyes, his resolve hardening. He had failed to embody the ideals he'd taught his son, but perhaps it wasn't too late to change. Max had not let grief anchor him. Though the sorrow of the funeral still lingered in his expression, his movements across the horizon seemed more deliberate, more purposeful. He had thrown himself into helping where he could, assisting with small repairs or lending his strength when needed. The armed escort that shadowed him on his walks no longer seemed to bother him. He even waved at them occasionally, earning uneasy but returning nods. Malinar often joined him on his walks, their conversations growing steadily in both depth and ease. Max's guarded nature hadn't completely melted away, but his trust in her was apparent. One afternoon, as they strolled through the observation deck, Malinar asked, "Max, you've told me bits about Earth and your studies, but what drove you to achieve so much so young?" Max hesitated, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of stars beyond the glass. "Honestly, I was bored." Malinar tilted her head, her furred ears twitching in curiosity. "Bored?" "Yeah, on Earth I was, well, different. Things came too easily. The way people thought, the way problems were presented, it was all so straightforward. I wanted something more." He paused, his expression softening as a small, nostalgic smile crossed his face. "Then my parents changed everything. They told me we were joining the colony effort. I was 14 at the time." "And that motivated you?" Malinar asked, sensing a shift in his emotions. He nodded. "It did. When I realized they'd be leaving before I turned 18, I knew I had to graduate early if I wanted to go with them. So I threw myself into my studies, skipped grades, and managed to graduate at 16. After that, I joined the colony training program alongside my parents." "That must have been exhausting," Malinar remarked, her tone light but empathetic. Max chuckled faintly. "It was, but I didn't stop there. During training, I kept studying. Engineering, biology, physics, sociology. Anything I thought might help me survive and contribute to the colony." His voice grew heavy, and his words trailed off. Malinar felt the weight of his memories pressing against him. "You don't have to push yourself," she said softly. "You've already shared so much." Max glanced at her, his gratitude unspoken but clear, and nodded. Malinar quickly redirected the conversation to her people's culture, describing the intricate traditions of her garden world. She watched Max's posture relax as he listened intently, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. As their walk carried them through the corridors of the horizon, they passed by Captain Cabo. The Altheadan's towering form was impossible to miss, and for a brief moment his sharp eyes met Max's. "Captain," Max said politely, inclining his head. "Williams," Cabo replied curtly, his tone professional but distant. He moved past without stopping, leaving the air tinged with unease. Malinar felt Cabo's emotions ripple faintly, a reflection of something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't distrust, though. It was complicated. Later, as Max returned to his isolation habitat, Ava materialized, her humanoid hologram projecting in soft blue light. "I've compiled all available data on the Altheadan species," Ava said, her tone precise. "Would you like me to upload it to your tablet?" Max shook his head. "No thanks, I wouldn't understand Cabo just by reading data." Malinar, who had been quietly observing, raised a brow. "What do you mean by that?" Max glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Understanding someone doesn't just come from information. It comes from emotions, context, and how they speak about themselves and their people. Data can only tell me so much. Conversations tell me the rest." Malinar stared at him, her empathic senses catching the sincerity in his words. She suddenly realized that every time Max had learned something about her people, it had been through their talks, not from asking Ava for information privately, but from their shared moments. That night, Malinar sat in her quarters, Max's words echoing in her mind. Her gaze fell on a small crystal-wood sculpture resting on her shelf. Its intricate curves and patterns caught the light, casting soft, refracted colors across the room. Coda had made it years ago during a rare shore leave. He'd spent a week learning about her traditions, crafting the sculpture as a reflection of her people's values. She remembered how eager he'd been to connect with others, how his intelligence and curiosity had been tempered by kindness and respect. Max's words, his mannerisms, his thoughtful approach to understanding others, they all reminded her of Coda. He had been wise beyond his years, willing to bridge gaps where others saw only divides. A pang of bittersweet emotion filled her chest. She hadn't thought of Coda in this way for a long time. As her fingers brushed the smooth surface of the sculpture, she wondered if Max's guarded nature hid a heart as warm and compassionate as Coda's had been. Perhaps she thought Max wasn't so different from Cabo's late son after all. Max stood by the observation room's panoramic window, his figure silhouetted against the swirling colors of a distant nebula. The ethereal hues painted the glass in shades of violet and gold, casting a soft glow over his face. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture calm but contemplative. Malinar sat nearby, leaning against the wall near the door. Though she couldn't see his expression, her empathic senses told her enough. There was a flicker of hope within him, fragile but growing stronger. "If my colony's gone," Max said softly, his voice carrying an edge of determination, "then I have to believe humanity is still out there. Somewhere I can't let myself think otherwise." Malinar tilted her head, her ears twitching slightly as she studied him. "That hope, it's what keeps you moving forward, isn't it?" Max nodded, his gaze never leaving the nebula. "It has to. I owe it to the people we lost, to the ones who came before me, and to myself." The room fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't demand words but allowed them space to think. Max's presence was different now, less guarded, more open, and Malinar couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration for the young human. The quiet was broken by the door's chime, signaling Captain Cabo's arrival. His towering ursine form filled the doorway, his expression unreadable. Malinar stood and straightened her posture, casting Max a quick glance. "Max," Cabo rumbled, his voice low but firm. "May I speak with you privately?" Max turned, his expression neutral but polite. "Of course." He looked at Malinar and gave a small nod. "It's fine, go ahead." She hesitated for a moment, but Max's calm demeanor reassured her. With a small smile, she excused herself and left the room. Cabo waited until the doors slid shut before stepping forward, his large frame dwarfing the room's furnishings. Max returned to the window, his hands still behind his back, and waited. "I've been reflecting," Cabo began, his tone measured, "on my actions, my mistrust of you, and I think it's time you understood why." Max turned slightly, giving the captain his full attention. "My people, the Altheiadans, have suffered greatly because of other Deathworlders," Cabo said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We were exploited, enslaved, and left to rebuild from the ashes of what was once a proud civilization. For millennia we have fought to protect ourselves, to ensure we would never again be vulnerable." Max nodded, his expression softening. "I'm sorry for what your people have endured. No one should have to suffer like that." Cabo's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Max for any trace of insincerity, but he found none. "I've seen Deathworlders who relished in destruction, who saw the weak as prey. So when I met you, I couldn't see past the fact that you were one of them." "I understand," Max said quietly. "And yet you've proven yourself to be different. You've shown respect, restraint, and compassion, qualities I didn't expect to find in someone from a death world." Max took a slow breath, his gaze meeting Cabo's. "Even if I make it back to Earth and find nothing left, I'll still fight for your people, Captain. No one deserves to endure what the Altheiadans have faced." Cabo stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a deep breath, he asked, "Do you know anything about my people's culture?" Max shook his head. "No, Ava offered me the data, but I turned it down." "I wanted to hear it from you." Cabo's brow furrowed in surprise. "Why?" "Because understanding doesn't come from files," Max replied simply. "It comes from people. I want to learn about your people from you." The words seemed to disarm Cabo, and slowly he began to share. He spoke of the Altheiadans' values of strength and honor, their traditions of storytelling, and their reverence for nature. To his surprise, Max listened intently, occasionally drawing parallels to human cultures and disciplines. "Your culture reminds me of some martial traditions on Earth," Max said at one point. "The focus on honor, respect, and strength, it's not so different." Cabo grunted in acknowledgement, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps we're not so different after all." As their conversation wound down, Cabo leaned forward slightly, his tone more serious. "Max, would you fight for the crew? For the people here?" Max didn't hesitate. "Human bonds run deep, Captain. Even if they're afraid of me, I feel a responsibility to them." Cabo hummed thoughtfully, then leaned back. "Then there's no need for you to hide your weapons any longer. You may keep them on your person." Max blinked in surprise, his posture stiffening. I don't have any weapons. I didn't want you to think I was dangerous." Before Cabo could respond, Ava's hologram flickered to life. "Max," she said flatly, "I detected your weapons as soon as you opened that compartment. There's no point in denying it. Max sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine, but I suggest a compromise. My mag pistol and ammunition stay in the armory. I'll only keep my survival knife on me. Cabo considered for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. Under Cabo's watchful eye, Max retrieved the mag pistol and ammunition from his cryopod, securing them carefully in the armory. As he clipped the survival knife to his belt, he adjusted its angle, making the draw awkward but still functional. Cabo frowned. Why did you change the angle? It's a reassurance, Max replied. This way, it's clear I'll only draw it if it's absolutely necessary. Cabo gave a slow nod, his respect for the young human growing. Later that evening, Cabo visited Malinar in the medical bay. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. I had a long talk with Max, he said. Malinar looked up from her console, curiosity flickering in her eyes. He reminds me of Coda, Cabo admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. Malinar smiled faintly. I've noticed that too. Their intelligence, their compassion. It's uncanny. Cabo nodded slowly. If those raiders hadn't come, Coda and Max would have been best friends. Malinar's smile grew softer, but her tone was firm. Don't project your hopes onto Max. He's like Coda, but he's not Coda. Cabo sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. I know, but for the first time in years I feel hope. Malinar reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. Then hold on to that hope, Captain. It's what Max would want. Max's boots echoed softly against the metallic floor as he strolled through the ISC, Horizon with Malinar at his side. His freedom had expanded since Cabo decided to trust him more, and though armed escorts still shadowed him occasionally, their presence had become less imposing. Max appreciated the gesture, understanding it as a sign of growing trust between himself and the crew. Malinar glanced at him, her empathic senses picking up the subtle shift in his mood. You seem more at ease today, she observed. I think I'm just getting used to this place, Max replied with a faint smile. It helps that I'm not treated like a walking hazard anymore. The two shared a small laugh, their steps slowing as they passed one of the ship's maintenance bays. From inside, a flurry of activity caught their attention, along with the unmistakable figure of Ziphian Tech. The Cordian engineer, with her compact frame and 4 dexterous arms, was meticulously adjusting a drone's control module when she noticed them. Human, Ziphian called, waving one of her smaller hands. Her tone wasn't hostile, but there was a sharp curiosity behind it. She set down her tools and approached them, her 4 arms crossing in an almost comically serious stance. Max, she corrected herself, though her face was still creased with intrigue. I've been reading about human engineering. You have unconventional methods? Max raised an eyebrow. Unconventional how? Ziphian gestured dramatically, her smaller hands fluttering for emphasis. Your species seems to favor trial and error far more than logic demands. And this concept of, percussive maintenance. It's barbaric. Malinar covered her mouth, suppressing a giggle. Max, on the other hand, chuckled openly. Percussive maintenance isn't as barbaric as it sounds. It's just a last-ditch troubleshooting method. Sometimes, when a piece of technology is stuck, a well-placed tap can jog it back into alignment. Ziphian's eyes widened in horror. You hit things to make them work? Not just hit, calibrated hits, Max said with mock seriousness, earning a laugh from Malinar. It's about knowing the exact amount of force to apply in the right spot. It's not our preferred method, but it works when all else fails. That's efficient but horrifying, Ziphian muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. I could never. Machines should be treated with respect. Sometimes respect comes in the form of a firm smack, Max quipped, which drew another round of laughter from Malinar and an exasperated sigh from Ziphian. Later in their walk, Max and Malinar passed the ship's science department. The faint sound of muttering caught Max's attention, and he turned to see Tashar Wulp, the chief science officer, glaring intently at a holo display filled with a complex formula. Tashar, Max called, pausing in the doorway. Need help with that? The Vulpine scientist turned sharply, his sharp features narrowing in annoyance. Help? From you? I doubt you'd even begin to comprehend this. Max raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Tashar, clearly irritated, launched into an explanation. His tone was demeaning as he described the problem, emphasizing its complexity and the apparent impossibility of solving it within their current framework. When he finished, Max tilted his head. Tashar, you're right. That formula is impossible in 3 dimensions. The words hung in the air for a moment, and then, without another word, Max turned and walked away. Malinar hurried after him, glancing back at Tashar, who stood frozen in place, his ears twitching in confusion. Why didn't you help him? She asked. Wait for it, Max replied, a sly smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Almost on cue, a loud groan of frustration echoed from the science department. 4 dimensions, of course, Tasha shouted. Malinar blinked, then looked at Max in surprise. You knew he'd figure it out? Max nodded. Sometimes people don't like being handed answers, especially if they're used to being the smartest person in the room. A hint goes a long way. Malinar stared at him, her admiration for the young human deepening. You're full of surprises, Max. Back in his isolation habitat, Max sat on the edge of his cot, struggling slightly as he tugged at his boots. His hands paused, and he glanced at Ava's holographic projection hovering nearby. Ava, he said hesitantly, can you scan me and compare it to your initial scans of my biometrics? Ava's form flickered as she processed the request. Initiating scan. A moment later, she spoke again. There is a noticeable decrease in muscle mass and bone density compared to your initial scan. Shall I notify Malinar? Max shook his head. No, it's late. I'll handle it in the morning. Ava tilted her head, her expression neutral but slightly questioning. This decrease is consistent with prolonged exposure to lower gravity environments. Have you accounted for this in your dietary and exercise routines? Max sighed, leaning back against the wall. I knew it was a risk, but it's hitting me faster than I expected. He glanced at the survival bars on his desk, their foil wrappers glinting in the light. These aren't cutting it. The protein levels aren't high enough to compensate. Ava watched silently as Max pulled up a calendar on his tablet. It's been almost a month, he muttered. And the ship's artificial gravity is calibrated for species like Malinar and Ziphian, not for someone like me. Closing his eyes, he exhaled deeply. There was only one option. He needed to talk to Malinar and get Cabo's permission to access the gym and the ship's food stores. It wasn't an easy request, but he knew it was necessary. As he lay back on the cot, his thoughts drifted to Earth. The training program had warned him about the dangers of low gravity, but he hadn't expected to deal with them so soon. Still, he resolved to adapt as he always had. Tomorrow, he'd take the first step toward ensuring he didn't just survive, but thrived on this ship. The artificial lights of the Horizon's observation room cast a dim glow as Malinar stepped through the threshold into Max's isolation habitat. She found him standing at the window, his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the swirling stars outside. Good morning, Max, she greeted, though her empathic senses immediately caught the weight of his mood. He turned, offering a faint smile. Morning, Malinar. The usual ease of their conversations was missing, replaced by a quiet seriousness that set her on edge. She crossed her arms, leaning lightly against the doorframe. What's on your mind? You're usually more talkative by now. Max hesitated before sighing. It's about me, physically, I mean. I've been doing my best to adjust to the conditions here, but... He gestured vaguely to his arms and legs. My body isn't holding up. The ship's artificial gravity is too light for someone from Earth, and I'm starting to lose muscle mass and bone density. I've known for a few days, but I wanted to be sure before bringing it up. Malinar narrowed her eyes. That's why you stopped helping with the heavier cargo. Max nodded. I figured it would draw less attention if I just kept to myself, but it's getting to the point where I need to do something about it. The medical officer's brow furrowed as her mind churned through possibilities. What exactly do you need? Equipment? Nutritional adjustments? Both, Max admitted. And permission to use the ship's gym. I need to work out to counteract the effects. But it's not just about exercise. My body needs higher-calorie, high-protein meals to build back what I'm losing. Malinar straightened, her tail flicking thoughtfully. We'll have to convince Cabo. He's ultimately in charge of the ship's resources and crew access to restricted areas. Max winced slightly. That's what worries me. Cabo's warming up to me, but this might come off as another Death Worlder issue. I don't want to reinforce the stereotype that I'm difficult to accommodate. Malinar gave him a reassuring look. You're not difficult, Max. You're adapting to an environment that isn't designed for someone like you. If anything, the crew will respect you more for taking care of yourself. Besides, I have a feeling Cabo might see this as an opportunity. Max raised an eyebrow. Opportunity? She waved off the question. Let's just say Cabo is unique. I'll handle him. On the bridge of the Horizon was abuzz with quiet activity as Malinar stepped onto it. Cabo Zoam stood near the main console, his massive frame towering over the rest of the crew as he reviewed navigation data. He glanced up as Malinar approached, his ursine features shifting into a look of curiosity. Malinar, he greeted. What brings you here? Malinar clasped her hands behind her back, standing tall despite Cabo's imposing presence. Captain, I need to discuss a matter regarding Max. It's about his health. Cabo's expression darkened slightly. Is something wrong? Not exactly wrong, but complicated. Malinar began carefully. The ship's artificial gravity is calibrated for species like mine and Ziphians, but it's too low for someone from Earth. Max is starting to lose muscle mass and bone density. If we don't address it soon, it could become a serious issue. Cabo grunted, his gaze thoughtful as he considered her words. What do you propose? Max needs access to the gym and specialized equipment to counteract the effects. Ideally, he should be working out regularly in conditions closer to Earth gravity. To her surprise, Cabo's ears perked up, and a wide grin spread across his face. A chance to see what this human is made of? Excellent, I'll schedule a sparring session with him myself. Malinar blinked, caught off guard by his enthusiasm. Captain, I don't think that's a good idea in his current condition. He's not at his peak, and any sort of physical match would be unbalanced. Before Cabo could protest, Ava's holographic form flickered into view. Malinar is correct, the AI interjected, her tone calm but firm. Max's current biometrics indicate significant muscle atrophy compared to his baseline. A match against you, Captain, would not be advisable. Cabo huffed but relented. Fine, what's your alternative suggestion? Malinar smiled slightly. Let him join the Authiadans on board for their morning workouts. Your species' gravity requirements are closer to his, and it would give him the challenge he needs without overburdening him. Cabo stroked his chin thoughtfully before nodding. Very well. If Max is willing, he can join our sessions. But I'll still want to see him in action once he's recovered. Dinner. Later that evening, Malinar found Max in the mess hall picking at a plate of food. She slid into the seat across from him, her expression unreadable. How'd it go? Max asked, glancing up. Better than expected, Malinar replied, her lips quirking into a faint smile. Cabo agreed to let you use the gym, but there's a catch. You'll be working out with the Authiadans during their morning sessions. Max froze, his fork hovering in midair. The Authiadans? Malinar nodded. Their gravity requirements are similar to Earth's, and their training regimen should help you rebuild what you've lost. Max leaned back in his chair, his face pale. Great. I've always wanted to be crushed by a bear before breakfast. Malinar laughed, shaking her head. They won't hurt you, Max. They'll respect your effort even if you can't keep up with them right away. Max sighed, muttering under his breath. This is going to be interesting. Malinar's smile softened. You'll be fine, Max. You're stronger than you think in more ways than one. Max didn't reply, but a small, determined smile tugged at his lips. He wasn't looking forward to the workouts, but he knew they were necessary, and perhaps, just maybe, they'd help him feel a little more at home among the crew. The gravity in the gymnasium was noticeably denser, almost oppressive, as Max stepped through the entrance alongside Malinar. She moved with careful precision, encased in an exoframe that compensated for her garden-worlder physiology. The Authiadans had already begun their routine, their massive forms moving with surprising agility despite the increased gravity. Their voices boomed, a mixture of laughter and encouragement echoing through the space. Max took a deep breath, his steps hesitant as he approached the group. Cabo Zoam turned to greet him, his ursine features splitting into a grin. Max, you're just in time for our warm-up. Let's see what you're made of. Max nodded, offering a small, slightly strained smile. Thanks for letting me join, Captain. I'll try to keep up. The Authiadans chuckled, their deep voices rumbling like distant thunder. Cabo gestured to the track that ran along the walls of the gymnasium. First up, the run. Try to stay with the pack. Max stepped onto the track, the heavier gravity already pulling at his limbs. As the group started their run, he stumbled slightly, drawing a few amused glances. But he recovered quickly, finding a steady rhythm. The Authiadans' longer strides carried them ahead, but Max's persistence kept him going. Sweat began to bead on his brow, his breathing steady despite the strain. Malinar, observing from the sidelines, tilted her head. Humans lack fur and have more sweat glands. It allows them to maintain activity longer without overheating. Cabo, hearing this, glanced back at Max with renewed curiosity. Interesting. Persistence hunting, perhaps? A fascinating trait for a Deathworlder. As the laps continued, Max surprised everyone by lasting longer than expected. When Cabo finally slowed to a stop, Max pushed on for another lap before joining the others, his chest heaving but his resolve unshaken. Cabo clapped a massive hand on Max's shoulder. You've earned your place here, human. Max managed a smile, wiping sweat from his brow. Thanks, Captain. That was just the warm-up, right? The group's laughter boomed, filling the gymnasium. The next part of the workout focused on strength training. The Authiadans gravitated toward the heaviest weights, their powerful bodies straining with controlled precision. Max, in contrast, chose more modest weights, focusing on maintaining proper form. He alternated between exercises, shifting between muscle groups to keep his momentum steady. Ava's holographic form flickered into existence nearby. Max is employing a human-specific training philosophy. alternating muscle groups to avoid fatigue while maintaining effort. Quite efficient. Cabo grunted in approval as he set down a particularly heavy weight. He may not have our strength, but he's clearly using his mind to make up for it. Malinar scanned Max's vitals from her exoframe. He's stable, no signs of overexertion so far. The session continued without incident until one of the younger Otheodans, Molar, approached Max with a sly grin. You've done well so far, human, but let's see if you can handle the obstacle course. Max's eyes lit up with curiosity. Obstacle course? Sure, why not? What Molar failed to mention was that the course was designed for pairs of Otheodans to tackle together. Max, undeterred, approached the start of the course and launched himself into it with enthusiasm. His smaller frame and agility quickly became assets as he navigated the tight spaces and high climbs. Where brute strength was required, he found clever ways to leverage his environment, using ropes and beams to his advantage. By the time Cabo and Malinar noticed, Max was balancing precariously on the rope cross, his arms outstretched for balance. Malinar's empathic senses spiked with alarm, but she held back, watching intently as Max carefully made his way across. When he finally dropped to the ground, completing the course, the gym was silent for a moment before Cabo's booming laugh echoed through the space. You've outdone yourself, Max, Cabo roared. Even I didn't expect you to handle that alone. Max, catching his breath, looked at Molar and smiled. Thanks for the suggestion. Doing it solo was a great cool-down after the workout. Molar's expression soured, but the rest of the Otheodans nodded in approval, their respect for Max visibly growing. As Max and Malinar left the gym, Max staggered slightly, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Malinar steadied him with her exoframe, her voice calm. You did well today, but you'll need more than just those survival bars to recover. Max nodded, his voice tired but grateful. I'll take anything at this point. When they reached his isolation habitat, Malinar surprised him with a small spread of protein-rich foods. I did some research and found these. While I can't stomach the idea of eating meat, I found flora from my homeworld that your metabolism can process for similar benefits. Max's eyes lit up as he sat down. This one tastes like tuna. That's oddly comforting. Malinar tilted her head. Tuna? Fish, I assume? Max nodded. Humans eat a lot of different things. Plants, animals, fish, fungi. It's a big part of our adaptability. Malinar hummed thoughtfully. My people are technically omnivores as well, but we feel the emotions of animals too strongly to eat them. It's unsettling. Max leaned forward, intrigued. That's fascinating. Do you think that empathy shapes your culture's approach to food and life? The two continued their conversation, delving into culinary arts, food sources, and the ways their respective species viewed sustenance. As they shared the meal, a quiet camaraderie settled between them, the bond of trust and understanding growing stronger with each passing moment. After breakfast and a brief rest, Max set out on one of his solitary walks around the ship. With his newfound freedom to roam, he took the opportunity to observe the various departments and offer assistance where he could. Though he was cautious not to overstep, his natural curiosity and problem-solving abilities quickly drew attention. In the engineering bay, Max encountered Ziphian Tech, the meticulous Cordian engineer, who was repairing a maintenance drone. Noticing her struggle with a particularly stubborn component, Max hesitated before offering a suggestion. Ziphian, initially skeptical, allowed him to explain. Max's understanding of engineering principles, rooted in humanity's trial-and-error approach, provided a fresh perspective. With his input, the repair was completed more efficiently, earning a reluctant nod of approval from Ziphian. Further along his route, Max stopped by the hydroponics lab, where a team of botanists was analyzing a malfunction in the nutrient delivery system. Recognizing the issue as a simple calibration error, Max pointed it out and helped adjust the settings. The botanists, though surprised by his knowledge, were grateful for his assistance. One of them even joked that Max was becoming an honorary member of every department on the ship. When Max passed through the science department, he found Tashar Wulp muttering angrily at a data console. Remembering their previous encounter, Max approached cautiously and inquired if he could help. Tashar, still skeptical of Max's abilities, dismissed him at first, but eventually relented. Max quickly identified a flaw in the algorithm Tashar was using and suggested a correction. Though reluctant to admit it, Tashar grudgingly implemented the change, which resolved the issue. Perhaps you're not entirely useless, Tashar muttered, which Max chose to take as a compliment. As the day progressed, Max's interactions with the crew became more frequent and positive. His willingness to contribute, coupled with his humility and resourcefulness, began to shift even the most skeptical opinions. By the time he returned to his habitat, he felt a sense of accomplishment, though he was physically exhausted from the combined exertion of the workout and his activities. When Malinar checked in on him later, she found Max resting but in good spirits. He recounted his day, highlighting the moments of connection he had experienced with the crew. Malinar listened with a soft smile, noting how Max's efforts were slowly breaking down the barriers of mistrust and misunderstanding that had initially surrounded him. As the ship settled into its evening cycle, Max lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The sense of progress and camaraderie he had felt throughout the day was undeniable, yet a pang of loneliness lingered in his chest. Despite the bonds he was beginning to forge, he couldn't shake the longing for the familiarity of human faces, voices, and cultures. He thought of Earth, its towering cities, endless forests, and the vibrant, chaotic tapestry of humanity. Were they still out there, thriving as he hoped? Or had the vast, indifferent void of space claimed them as it had claimed so many others? These questions gnawed at the edges of his mind, refusing to be silenced. "I'll find a way back," he murmured to himself, the conviction in his voice soft but resolute. "And when I do, I'll make sure we're still standing." The thought brought a bittersweet smile to his face. No matter how integrated he became with the crew of the Horizon, a part of him would always yearn for home, a home he could only wish was still waiting for him.